In this video, we are getting closer to having a full model for our aggregate supply, aggregate demand, so that we can look at our business cycle. Now we've actually put some of the curves together. So in this video, we're going to be looking at aggregate demand and long-run aggregate supply together. All right, so I've already set up this initial one, so this would be kind of our starting position. All right, so we've got our original aggregate demand curve, we've got our long-run aggregate supply curve at here SGR, the solo growth rate, and then we've marked our kind of equilibrium inflation rate for the moment. But let's say that we want to try to help boost the economy, right? And we increase aggregate demand, right? So let's say, it doesn't really matter how we do it, but let's say, right, let's say we increase the money supply, all right? So the Federal Reserve, right, creates some more money, and we get a new aggregate demand curve, right? So an increase in the money supply, or the money supply growth rate, is going to lead to an increase in the aggregate demand curve when we, just like with our plain old demand curves, whenever we increase aggregate demand, we shift the curve to the right. All right, so we now have a new equilibrium, right? A new long-run equilibrium. All right, so we can see, looking at this, increasing aggregate demand in the long run does not have much of an effect, or at least not much of a positive one, right? When we go from our original aggregate demand curve to AD1, right, our inflation rate has increased, but our growth rate has not, and I did not fully, properly label this graph. All right, but our real GDP growth rate didn't change at all. It stayed at the solo growth rate. All right, so again, in the long run, if aggregate demand increases, then the inflation rate will increase, but the solo growth rate will stay the same. All right, so increasing the money supply does not lead to increased growth, right, in the long run. All right, so this is really showing, all right, what this is showing is something that I've said, probably 3 or 4 times by now, all right, money is neutral in the long run, all right? So I'd referenced this in the last video. Again, said at any inflation rate, this solo growth rate is going to be the same. Right, and we can look and see, right, using our aggregate demand curves, that that's the truth, right? We can further go on to say that, this increase was caused by an increase in the money supply growth rate, so that is not going to change, right? Increasing the money supply does not change our solo growth rate, or doesn't change our real GDP growth rate in the long run. It only changes inflation. And if we're increasing, that's leading to an increase as well. All right, so this graph that we just had up here, this really encapsulates that idea, or graphically shows that money is neutral in the long run. All right, sorry about that. So printing money does not lead to growth. So that was actually pretty quick. So we're going to actually keep going. And we will now look at the, you know what, actually, no, we won't. So we'll go ahead and end here. We'll just make this a very short video. In the next video, we are going to add our second aggregate supply curve. I'm sure some of you saw that coming because we had a long run aggregate supply curve. In the next video, we'll be looking at the short run aggregate supply curve, and we'll be kind of putting everything together when we do that, right? But that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.